Thank you for joining us at the Putnam County Library. Today's Lunch and Learn will have Peggy Fragopoulos and Dwight Henry telling us scary stories. And I will turn off the background music that does not sound like a scary story.
Well, Dwight and I have some stories, maybe, let's say a ghost story, a witch story, a spirit story, and a snake story to tell you today, okay? So I will begin this session, and I will say that all that we're going to impart to you is supposed to be true. So it's not something that's made up, okay? Now, some of you will identify with this. I had a mother who never told a lie. And boy, did I get it if I did tell one. Not even the off truth. Mom, she was all business. She just thought it was wrong to lie. And so this is why I really believe this story. She said that when she was 12 years old, she was from a family of 15 children. And they had many infant deaths because of the time period. Mom was born in 1907. And so it was a time period when her mother had already contracted tuberculosis. And so the children were having to help whatever way they could, but the 5 oldest ones had gone to California to make their living. It was during the economic hardships here, and so they went out to work in the oil fields or to get land grants from the state of California. And so her mother sent her out to gather up some apples for dinner that night. And so in that day, the little girls wore long dresses, and they had an apron on, you know, to keep the dress clean while they worked during the day. So she had her apron all gathered up, and she was going around and picking up little old knotty apples, because they didn't have those big ones that we have in the stores today, shipped in. So she was picking up apples and picking them up, and she happened to notice when her apron was about full that there was a rider coming in on the horizon. And so she couldn't really see who he was. He had a hat on like all the men wore back in the day. And she just kept picking up the apples and watched him approach. And when it was pretty full, he was close enough that she recognized it was her oldest brother, Luther, who had been in California for 2 years. And so she was going, "Luther, Luther!" And so he put up his hand. She threw him an apple. He caught the apple. And then he tipped his hat, never speaking, rode past her, and kept going. She was calling out, "I'll see you back at the house. Bye." Well, she hurried up with her apples and everything and went back home just as quickly as possible to find her mother holding a crinkled piece of paper. She was sitting on the porch in a ladder-back chair, crying. The letter read, "Luther Barnes died in California in the oil fields a week before that." Of course, they were trying to make sense out of it, but Mom said the family just felt that he came by to tell him that he was okay one last time. And I believe her.
Near Adams, Tennessee, stands a historical marker on a farm which was once owned by John Bell and his family. It became the scene of a series of mysterious manifestations which were known as the Bell Witch Hauntings. Now in 1804, John Bell, his wife Lucy, and 9 children moved from North Carolina to Tennessee. And in 1817, they began to experience some unexplained phenomenon, mostly centered around their daughter, Betsy.
As time went on, was different, as Dwight said, different series of things happening. The first thing that started happening was pounding around the outside of the cabin. And so they would be quiet in the house, pounding again. And they didn't know where it was coming from or what was causing it. Also, the family began to hear things. Sometimes it was just tapping inside the cabin. And Betsy was one time attacked at night, and in the encounter she had whelks all over her face and bruises. They began to hear voices. The voices were voices of someone speaking, and also it sounded like someone was singing. But they couldn't hear it loud enough that they could decipher what actually was happening. Well, as time went on, the voices became louder. And so they understood them to say they were quoting scriptures. And they were actually singing hymns. And so in the hymns, some of it sounded a bit like this. Rock of ages, cloud for me, let me hide myself in thee. And they began to call her the witch. And the witch made no matter of business in letting John Bell know she hated him. I'll kill thee, John Bell. Well, I tell you, as more happened, the stories began to get outside the household. And so the people in the community knew about it. And so, of course, you tell one community, it's going to spread to another community and another one. And so before it was over with, communities hundreds of miles away had heard about it. And so many people wanted to come to understand or at least see these encounters, even though you couldn't see the witch. But it was noted that she would carry on conversations with some of the people who came to visit and the family members. And she even shook some people's hands. Well, it didn't stop. It kept on being such a problem that John Bell was excommunicated from his church in 1818. Oh, wow. And most probably, the witch was to blame.
Now here's a part of the story you might not have heard. Andrew Jackson gained fame as a major general in the War of 1812. And John Bell's three oldest sons served under him and fought with him in the Battle of New Orleans. So Jackson had heard about the witch. And in 1819, the general paid a visit to the Bell homestead. And he was determined that he was going to prove that the whole thing was just a hoax, or he was going to drive that spirit away. Now Jackson had one wagon and several men as they came onto the Bell farm. But as they entered the farm, the wagon became stuck. Not in mud, but it seemed as some unseen force had caused it to happen. Jackson looked around curiously and said, "By the eternals, boys, I do believe it is the witch." And they heard a female voice.
All right, General, let the wagon move on, but I'll see you later tonight.
And with that, the wagon did move on. Later that evening, under their tent, General Jackson and his men listened to a self-proclaimed witch hunter. He had a silver bullet, and he told story after story after story of other witches that he had shot. Jackson leaned over to one of his men and said, I'll bet that man's an arrant coward. I wish that thing would appear right now. I'd like to see him run. And once again, the voice.
All right, General. I am at hand and ready for business.
The voice demanded that the witch hunter shoot her. And he tried, and he tried, and he tried, but the gun would not fire. The witch hunter began to twist and turn and grimace and shouted out loud that something or someone was sticking painful pins all the way through his body from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And Jackson and his men watched in shock as the witch hunter leaped to his feet and ran out of the tent screaming into the woods and into the darkness.
How the devil did run and beg. How he ran and begged. I bet that old codger will not bring his horse pistol around here again and try to scare us. He's gone. But I'll see you later tonight, General.
Now, it was shortly after that General Jackson and his men decided to hightail it right out of bounds. Now, accounts of this event exist, but none of them appear in General Jackson's personal writings.
Just 2 years later, in 1820, John Bell, at the age of 70, died. The only thing left in the room, besides the corpse, was a vial that had a clear liquid in it. So the family took the vial and poured out a little bit of the liquid into a saucer and fed it to the cat. Well, the cat lapped it right up, then began to contort and convulse and drop dead. I told you I'd get you, John Bell. Well, it was reported that as the funeral processional took John Bell's body to the burial spot on the Bell farm, that they could hear the witch laugh and sing the whole way to the grave. Rock of Ages, clap for me. Let me hide myself in thee. As he drew his final breath and his eyes closed in death, and he went to worlds unknown. Well, stories still came up about John Bell and the witch. And they were volumes that was written about it. In fact, people that had come to have an encounter with the witch wrote about their encounters. So volume after volume. But, I mean, people, if you study it and look at it, they think, well, probably it was created mostly by the Bell family. Oh, no, it wasn't. Only half the story has yet been told.
Now, it's been speculated that the manifestations were merely a ruse to break up the relationship between Betsy and her fiancé, Joshua Gardner, because the witch was strongly opposed to that marriage. And indeed, in 1821, Betsy did end the relationship in fright. And in 1824, she married her school teacher, Richard Powell, who, after taking a liking to Betsy, became good friends with her parents, and he was a frequent visitor in their home. And it was shortly after that that the noises and the manifestations began. And also in 1821, Richard Powell's first wife died mysteriously. Now, I'll leave it up to you good folks to come to your own conclusions about all that. Thank you.
Have any of you heard of the Bell Witch?
I actually supposed to be related to that family, because I told you already my dad lived in Adams, and that he said that
Ah.
we were related to that, so I thought that was kind of interesting.
The next story that I would like to reveal to you happened to me on one of my travels. I used to take students, and still do, wherever, whatever interesting place we can find. And one time we were in Germany, and I usually want to incorporate history as well as fun experiences. So we were in Dachau, and all of you know, of course, about the concentration camp that was there, the crematorium, the gas showers, and all the atrocities that occurred in that concentration camp. So we had an introductory film telling about the history of the camp. And then we went out into the open where there's still, the crematorium is still there, the showers are there, the bunks and the houses, which were, most of those still exist. Some have been torn down over the years. But they had opened a bunker in the back. It was, had never been opened. It was a building that was very long. And it probably had something like 50 cells on each side of the hallway that ran the length of the building. And it had been closed. They had no interest in opening it. And when I'd been there before, I'd visited several times, but this time they said, hey, we have opened this bunker, and you're welcome to go in and visit. Just really, you can just see the cells that the prisoners were kept in, but pretty much that's it. And so as we walked around, and the students and people that were with me went to other areas to just visit on their own, I always wanted them to take time for their own self-thoughts and what they knew in their studies about that time in history. And so I just went ahead and walked to the bunker. And as I said, it was a very long building. And there was one door that was right in the middle. And then it had one door which exited at the very end on the right side as I looked at it. And so I walked in, no one was in the whole building. And so I just stood there for a minute. I kind of have to reflect, what went on in that time of history. And I looked up and down, and it was just deadly quiet. And so I started my trek to the right, and I walked on down and tiptoed and looked in. They had a little 12-inch square that you could see, and the bars were on the window, and it was totally just a cell. There was no outdoor window at all. And there was one chair, one cot, iron cot, and then a small commode. And that was it. Nothing else was in there. There was it was smaller than this section of this room right here, just really small. And so I would look at this side, and then I would go right opposite of it, except it was opposite enough that, and juxtaposition that they couldn't see each other if they looked out of their little cell into the hall. And so I would go each one, and I'd step back and forth, and all of them were the same. Some of them were totally empty because they just had a couple set up as it was then. And so I was about 5 cells from the very end. And so I was standing there in the middle, and I had heard the door open down below a few minutes before, and saw that one of my students, Misty, had come in. And so she was standing and doing the same thing as I was doing, going back and forth. But I mean, there was no air. It was very, very still. And so I was standing quietly, and I heard, so I looked around me. No one had come in. And then I felt air stirring around me. And I thought, okay. and I walked pretty quickly outside. So I was standing on the outside waiting for Misty to come. And so she came out the door and she said, "Did you feel that?" And I went, "Feel what?" "I don't know what you're talking about." She said, "Did you feel that? That air in there?" And I said, "Where did you feel it?" She said, "About 4 cells back." And I said, "I did." And she looked at me and she said, "I heard 2 sighs." And I said, "Well, I just heard 1. So who knows what spirits are still trapped in that horror of World War II. Thank you.
Not a ghost, but a snake.
Oh.
I know you're all familiar with the sentence, "The good Lord works in mysterious ways." Well, Faith Chapel Church was a little country church. 1 room, white wood structure, beautiful. Looked like it belonged on the cover of National Geographic magazine. I happened to be the pastor of the church at the time. We had no running water, we had no indoor plumbing, so we had all of our baptizings in the creek that was close to the church. And we had no indoor plumbing, but I would always tell our folks that we may not have indoor plumbing, but we have got the best outhouse in Buffalo Valley. Now, in case some of you don't know, the outhouse was the original porta potty. But with the outhouse, it was all potty and no porta. You would dig a hole, you would build a structure that you could sit on, construct a little shed around that, and you would hope that the Environmental Protection Agency never showed up. But you did not move it. There was no porta. But the truth be told, most of the folks who came to Faith Chapel Church did all their bathroom business before they came to church, or they just got the hell of it, until they got home. But once in a great while, one of our church members had the need to make that little short trip from the church house to the outhouse, and when you gotta go, you gotta go. And that was the case with Sister Mildred one day, right after Sunday school and right before church, she had to go. Well, Sister Mildred was what my grandpa Henry might call a right fleshy woman. And she would always wear a dress or skirt down to her ankles, and no self-respected woman of her age during that time would dare go to church without wearing a pair of pantyhose. So she makes her way to the outhouse, assumes a position, gets everything pulled down, the pantyhose that need to be pulled down, and everything pulls up that needs to be pulled up, and she was ready. Now, what I'm going to tell you in the next few minutes, I just know that some of you are going to say, "I don't know about that, I don't know about that, I just don't know about that." But let me challenge you after today, sometime get on Interstate 40, go west to exit 268, which is the Buffalo Valley exit. Get off that exit, turn right, go about a mile, mile and a half, and you'll see this pretty little white church you'll see in there today. And maybe, just maybe, I don't know for sure, but maybe the remnants of this outhouse I'm telling you about is still around back. Well, there Sister Mildred was, ready. And as she was wont to do, being the righteous, holy woman that she was, especially on the Lord's Day, she gazed toward the heavenlies. And what she saw when she gazed toward the heavenlies changed our little church and that community forever. Because looking down at her, eyeballs to eyeballs, about 2 or 3 inches away, was a big old long snake. Now, Sister Mildred was out of the old school. Every once in a while, she would what we call get spiritual. And when she got spiritual, Sister Mildred got loud. When she got spiritual, Sister Mildred sounded like somebody sneezing, a wild animal howling, and a woman screaming all at the same time. And she saw that snake and she cut loose. Woo! Woo! Well, I know you could have heard her halfway to Lebanon or halfway to Monterey. And the noise obviously scared the snake because it let go of whatever it was hanging on to at the top of that outhouse, and pantyhose pulled down to her ankles, fell down right into her pantyhose. She took a foot and kicked that door of that outhouse open and started making her way as fast as she could, as good as she could, to the church house. Ha ha whoo! Ha ha whoo! Well, inside the church house, we were about to start service. And visiting for the very first time was Herman Dean. Now, Herman Dean had a reputation in our community. He was a big old man, a Paul Bunyan-looking man, big beard, big husky guy, and he had a reputation of being a hard-living, hard-drinking, hard-cussing man. In fact, he cussed so much, he wore out all the regular cuss words. He had to start making up his own cuss words. He cussed so much. Every single week his family would be there. There was his wife, Miss Pat, there, and there was his daughter, Dolly, and right beside Dolly would be their son, little Luke, and they would be right there in their seat. You know how it is, everybody had the same pew on the right side of the church, third row back from the front, boom, boom, boom. They would be there, and every single Sunday morning, Miss Pat would raise her hand and she would say, "Y'all, please, please pray for my husband, Herman Dean. He must change his way of living. Just pray that he would come to me, with me to church one time." Well, this happened to be that one time. There he was, sitting right by the aisle. And Brother Noble, our song leader, had gathered the choir up in the choir, and they were cranking out one of our favorites that we sang all the time. "Oh, when the saints go marching in, oh, when the saints go marching in, oh Lord, I want to be in that number when the saints go marching in." And boom, kicking in the back door, Sister Mildred came marching in. Whoo, ha, whoo, ha, whoo. Well, Brother Noble thought that Sister Mildred was in the spirit. And when Sister Mildred got to the spirit, all the music just speeds up. When the saints go marching in, when the saints go marching in, when she turns around, ah-whoo, makes her way, here's my hand to the good Lord, to the right side of the church, goes right down through there, and about the time she gets in front of Herman Dean, her ankles and the pantyhose and legs gets all tangled up, and she sprawled right into the middle of his lap. And she's swinging her arms, and she's spitting, and she said, "Help me, Lord, help me, Lord, help me, Lord." Well, Herman Dean didn't have a clue. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't know if it was a good Lord. He didn't know it was the devil. He didn't know what was happening. He turned whiter than a ghost and sat there for just a little bit of time, and then sprang to his feet. And when he sprang to his feet, there was not an altar call. There was not a sermon. There was not anything, but he headed straight for the altar. And he hit his knees, and he started to pray. And I want you to know, folks, he prayed all the way through when the saints go marching in. He prayed all the way through I'll Fly Away. And we were about halfway through, just over in the glory land, when Herman Dean stood up. And when he stood up, you could hear a pin drop. And we didn't know what Herman Dean knew or what he had done. But we found out that he knew at least one thing about one verse in the Bible. And that verse was, "You must confess your faults one to another." And boy, did he start to confess. He started back when he was in the first grade. He talked about this little girl that sat in front of him in the first grade. She brought her lunch in a brown paper sack and set it behind her, and he could see that lunch. And he picked up that bag of lunch, opened it up, and ate her sandwich. And then he ate her little cake, and then he tapped her on the shoulder, and she turned around and looked at him, and he popped the bag right in front of her face. That's where he started. And then he went on to tell us, well, he told us a lot of things that I don't care to tell you in mixed company today and really embarrass his family. But I'll tell you this, going forward that day, when those church doors opened, the first one through the church doors was Herman Dean. And 3 weeks from that day, our church was full. It was packed because people in that community knew that if that church could help Herman Dean, it could help anybody. Yes, and that's been several years ago. But if you go to Buffalo Valley today, they still talk about how the good Lord used an outhouse, a pair of pantyhose, and a long black snake to bring Herman Need to his knees. Yes, the good Lord does work in mysterious ways. Thank you.
We've talked about different kinds of stories, but I thought you might be interested in this phenomenon here in Cookeville, or at least this is how it's been told to me. There's a friend that I met that was from California, did live here in Cookeville and worked at a local factory, and his wife is actually from, I won't mention what country in Europe, some of you may figure out who I'm talking about, but she seems to have this ability to maybe see things that we don't see normally, or hear things, or whatever. And when I got to know the family a little bit better, she confided into me this particular story. I better not name the community either, otherwise you'll be going around there looking, but it's not far away, it's within the city limits. And she has this lovely home, and she said one day that she was washing dishes. And this community is an older community, and it used to have a creek that ran down the back of her property and on out. And I've done some investigation, can't find exactly where it connects to, but I have some wetlands on my property, which is not too far away, so I thought, well, maybe it's connected to that anyway. And so she was washing dishes, and it was early morning, and she looked out through the kitchen windows, and on the side, right next to where that creek, it still gets a little water in it, not a lot, where that creek is, she saw Union soldiers. And so she looked a little bit closer, and there they were. There were horses in her yard. They were in Union uniforms. One guy was down making coffee of the morning, and some of the other soldiers were just milling around. And so she stood there and watched them. And she thought, well, I'm going to go out there. And so she goes to the back door, and by the time she comes out, nothing's there. Well, you say, well, it's just her imagination, maybe. Well, not too much of a time after that, her grandson and her daughter were visiting from California. And so her grandson was upstairs on that end of the house and said, Grandma, who's out in the yard? He said, what do you mean, who's out in the yard? Come here, there's people out in the yard, there's horses. Now her grandson was about 7, 8 years old. And so his mother came in and looked out the window. And they stood and watched the exact same scenario that my friend saw. So she came upstairs and looked out and saw it for the second time. It was the same situation. The horses, the guys were, soldiers were milling about. One was fixing coffee. It was that same scene. And so again, she thought, well, I'm going to try and make it outside before this scene vanishes. But by the time she got out the back door, it was gone. So I asked her, I said, when she was telling me about this, I said, can I come and investigate? As if I know what I'm investigating, or trouble I'm getting into. And she said, sure. I said, I'm going to borrow a metal detector, and I'll bring and see if I can find anything that might date back, you know, like a Confederate button or a Union button from anything that I can connect with. Well, I've been over there a couple of times and go down to the creek where they had built the fire and everything, and have looked for a connection. I found some homemade nails. Maybe a cabin had been there before, and they had made, there may have been a blacksmith shop or whatever, but that's the only thing that I have yet to find. I would look longer, but I hate snakes. Really, I'm afraid of snakes. It doesn't matter how pretty they are in color. I've made myself touch them. I'm still afraid of them. You know, just trying to get over the fear. And then the mosquitoes will absolutely eat you up down at the creek's edge. But I kind of think there's something to that. And so you just need to be, I guess, aware of things around you, that there may be other dimensions that you might be able to examine yourself, right? You got another story, Dwight?
I don't know how much time we have. What do we have?
About 20 minutes.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
Didn't want to wear it a welcome. He might not invite us back. Let's see. How about a legendary family story that's been handed down on my mother's side? My great aunts, Beulah and Viola, lived in the small, remote, rural East Tennessee community of Gudger, Tennessee. Gudger, Tennessee. Now, they lived near each other, and the times were very hard in Gudger in the early 1900s. And they struggled just to put food on the table. In fact, they rarely had any meat to eat at all, and when the vegetable supply grew low from the garden that they shared together, they often went into the woods to dig up roots and boil them for dinner. Now they were single ladies with no other family around, so times were hard for them. And Beulah was on such a venture one brisk winter afternoon when she went into the woods, and while she was looking for roots, she saw an interesting object lying on the ground there. Curious, she picked it up. She brushed it off. It looked like, she believed, a toe. A big toe. A big hairy toe. Well, her first inclination was just to get it back to the ground. But as she touched it, as she felt it, you know, when you're hungry, things kind of feel different. It felt so meaty and maybe even delicious. So she took the handkerchief out of her pocket of her apron, wrapped it up, put it in her pocket, hurried back to her little cottage, got out a pot. Hot water, toe goes into the pot. And a few minutes later, she was enjoying a big bowl of big hairy toe soup. And of course, after she finished the soup, she enjoyed and ate the toe for dessert. A few minutes later, she would go to bed, and when she laid down, as she was about to drift off to sleep, it began to rain. And then a storm came up. There was lightning flashing and thunder rolling, and Beulah thought, well, I don't know if I've closed all the windows, and so she goes into her living room just to check things out, and she hears a noise outside in the yard near her front door. And it started out to be like a and then words. I want my big hairy toe. I want my big hairy toe. She is scared out of her wits. She heads back to the bedroom, covers herself up with a blanket, and it continues. I want my big hairy toe. Beulah is frightened as she can be. Her heart is racing. There's pounding on the door. I want my big hairy toe. I want my big hairy toe. And then there was a crash as if something fell. And the voice gets closer. I want my big hairy toe. She peeps out from under the blanket just in time to see the knob on her bedroom door turning. I want my big hairy toe. I want my big hairy toe. Beulah is scared as she can be, and she loses her composure, and she uncovers herself, and she says, I ate your big hairy toe. Silence. Nothing but silence. Now, at the crack of dawn the next day, my great Aunt Viola came to visit Beulah, as she often did each morning. And when she approached her home, she noticed that the front door was missing. And she walked inside, and there was the door lying on the floor in the living room. Beulah! Beulah! No answer. She walks into the kitchen. Beulah! Beulah! No answer. Into the bedroom. There's Beulah's bed, but no Beulah. She walks back out into the yard. She's frightened. She's scared. Where is her sister? She looks on the ground, and she sees a footprint. And that footprint is missing a big toe. So the moral of the story is, if you're ever in Gudger, and you're walking in the woods, and you see an object on the ground that looks curious, don't pick it up. Don't put it in your pocket. Don't take it home. Don't eat it. Because from that day to this, no one in Gudger or anywhere in that region ever heard from Beulah again. What you do if you face that is you don't walk, you run. Thank you.
And I think the only truth to that story is the cousins' names, right?
What's that?
The only truth to that story are your cousins' names.
Gudger's a real place.
Okay, that's the truth. Well, I have one more I think we have time for. I was going through things that have happened to me. I was once, had the opportunity to study in England. And I was in Grantham, England, where Margaret Thatcher country, you know, and I was staying in Harlexton College, which was supposed to be haunted. You know, all these old buildings have to be haunted. And it's used in many movies, like Little Lord Fauntleroy. It's one man lived in that. It was Gregory. I know after they showed me my room for the first time, I didn't find it that night, and I had to go get the night watchman to show where I was supposed to go because there were so many rooms. But it was a Shakespeare study, and so we would go to Shakespeare in the Blue Room or whatever. Well, there were about 100 students, and I will say this sidebar, I was actually in school with the Prince of Oman, who is now the ruler of the country of Oman. So that was an interesting tidbit, but not my story right now. But anyway, some of the girls, a couple of them, we had stayed up late at night, and the front of the house was a library. And I actually, you know, kind of told the girls that we'd take care of things and we'd clear it up with the librarian the next morning, and so they allowed us to stay. The night watchman allowed us to stay and study. So we studied, and we promised him we would turn out the light. Well, we couldn't find a switch. I mean, it was built like in the 9th century. So we couldn't find a switch anywhere. And so the next morning when I got down to breakfast, I went straight to the library, and I said, Annette and I and Trouty, we were in the library last night, and I'm sorry I didn't turn out the lights. I couldn't find the light switch. So she said, just come with me. And so I did. And went with her, and in the library, she moved one sconce, and the whole wall opened up. And so there were just dirt tunnels that went out 2 miles past the mansion, and it was dug to help Oliver Cromwell to hide when they were having the conflict in England at that time in history. So he was staying in the mansion, and when, of course, the opposers came, he would run out. And we actually used to take guests. We would come in at the opposite end of the tunnel, and they would come in, go through the tunnel, and then we would show up with a flashlight under our chin or whatever to scare them to death. But besides that, having fun with the tunnel, one other night we were there again. And so we had studied, and we were leaving. We had walked Annette to her upstairs bedroom, and then Trouty and I had gone down because we had to go through another set of doors, and it was one of those situations where I would have to give you my books, and then I'd take both hands, pull the door open, you would walk through, and then it would close. Well, we did that, And I looked at my watch and I said, well, it's late. I was living in Greece at the time, and so I said, I'm gonna call home because that's, I can catch my family. This is a good time for them. And so I pulled open the door. She came through, and so her back is to the door, and I'm facing the door. The door had closed, and so she handed me my books, and we were talking about what we were doing the next day or whatever, and we heard, and I said to her, I said, the door's opening. She said, you're kidding, right? And I said, no, the door is opening. She said, who's there? And I went, nobody. And she said, there has to be someone. It can't open by itself. I said, no, no one's there. And it was like we were frozen on the spot. Well, the door opened totally and closed. The second time, it opened again and closed. And we're still standing there. I don't know why. But we were just like rooted. It opened a third. And we could see on both sides. Well, then we took off. I slept in her room that night. I didn't make any call to Greece or anything. And the next morning when it became daylight, we both went down together and went and got a chair that we could put up and we could climb up. Is one of those huge heavy doors to see if there was strings attached or someone was playing a joke on us. We never stayed up that late again. We never went through that door again, but we still don't know why it opened, but it did, as God is my witness.
Thank you all so much. We appreciate it. It's great to be with you, and we appreciate the folks here at the library to make it possible. Any questions or observations, or y'all need to try this. You've got more stories in your life than you know about. You really do, and it's so.
And your family needs to hear them.
That's it. That's exactly right. And that, like they say, all stories are true. Some of them actually happened.
Now that's his story. All of mine were true.
Mine were true at their core, but maybe embellished.
Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We've really enjoyed your stories, and we hope everybody's enjoyed it. Now the camera is off, and if you have anything